Well, let's start out, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for Stan and I for being here. You know, this information we're covering tonight just simply is not information that's taught to us in school. But it's not just our obligation as adults to know this information. We have to really know how to apply it to really better our financial lives and our estate. So I really applaud you for taking the first step, really taking a proactive step to better your financial lives tonight. My name is Graham Wickham. I'm president and CEO of Wickham Financial and Insurance Services. I'm your co-host. I'm also an instructor and a consultant with 567 workshops. And we teach this same type of course in classes in schools and universities all around town, some on retirement planning, investment planning, financial planning in those workshops and seminars. So again, thank you for coming. Let me go ahead and introduce Stan. Stan Faulkner with Faulkner Law Group.
Yep, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. We're based here in Marietta, right in Graham's office. We're part of the team that work together often, and we've been focusing on estate planning for about 20 years now.
Yeah, fantastic. A couple quick items before we jump right into the webinar. As we move through the webinar today, we're going to have polling questions pop up. Take a second, let us know, what you think about the polling questions, answer those, and we'll try to give everyone a little bit of time, maybe a minute or two, and then we'll try to address those polling questions as we move forward. Questions, take some time throughout the webinar and type in questions. There's never a bad question. We're going to hold those to the end, but type in those questions and we'll look to address those in the end. But one last thing, let's make sure we keep those very general and to the topic that we're covering today. We want to try to avoid personal questions, as we're moving forward. All right, we can always address those in what we call our second session. So what do I mean by that? Well, I look at it as when you signed up for the webinar tonight, you kind of signed up for two sessions. One here online with us and one in our office. And the quick answer is, yeah, it's a lot of information. You already got on the webinar because you really wanted to try to get answers. And this is simply your opportunity to sit down with Stan and I and our teams and go over those questions, concerns that you have. Go over the topics we're covering in this webinar. And at the end of that, you simply decide. If you're ready to take a proactive step and you want the assistance of myself and Stan's team to implement strategies to better your financial lives, your estate, fantastic. We're here to help. But no problem if you don't. The real key here is that you take some information tonight and you take that proactive step. And I think if you do that, I really think we've done our job, right, Stan?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we move through the webinar, you're going to see my calendar pop up. Put down what general time and date works best for you. It doesn't need to be perfect. We'll call and confirm it. My team members will. And we can always make adjustments and changes along the way. The key is let's just get you on there, and then you can sit down with us for that second session. All right. Let's go ahead and jump forward into the first slide. So, Stan, talk to us a little bit about what is estate planning and why is it important?
Very good questions and a good way to start. I think, when we talk about estate planning, it's such a broad topic. It really encompasses a lot of things. And I think a lot of people tend to be too narrow with that focus, and they want to say it's just a will, but it's really not. The estate plan is way more than just having a will in place. Now, a will is part of that, and a very important part. The estate plan really is the second part of your financial plan. So if you're spending time, you want to think, a very simple analogy is, if your financial plan is important and it's number one, then the estate plan is 1B, right? It's the companion piece. So it's the backside that fits into that financial plan. So your financial plan includes, where you're investing, what you're accumulating, and how it's held. The estate plan is where it's going, how it's going to be used, and who it's going to, right? And so it fits right into that scenario. And if you think of it as part of your financial plan, if the finances are important to you, saving for your retirement or saving for somebody's education or preparing for long-term care or something like that, the estate plan should be just as important as that, because the finances take care of paying for the matter, but the plan itself, the estate plan, takes care of getting it to that institution or to that person who's going to use it for the purposes that you're saving for. And it should be thought of as in terms of that as being that important.
So it's part of a holistic approach.
Absolutely.
Right? It's one component, it's one layer, a part of that cake, that holistic approach.
Yeah.
Your wealth management, if you might.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. Next slide. So let's go over some statistics.
Very good question. And we just had a poll question pop up too in the point of this. So guys, if, the poll question here is, if you have a will that's over 10 years old, let us know. We'd love to see your responses to that. And we're going to talk about that because that's a very timely poll question here. One of the statistics, I think some of these will be surprising to you and to our audience, and probably not you so much, but 53% of Americans who die, there's 53% of Americans who die without a will or estate plan. So half of our population, almost more than half of our population, dies without a will. Now, the problem with that scenario is you've got a plan in place. It's just not a plan that you had anything to do with.
You have a wish, right?
Yeah. Right? And the law takes care of that for you, and it's not always what you want it to be. So that's a very interesting statistic for us, and one that sort of should bring off some alarm bells. 71.6% of Americans who do not have an up-to-date will. So that means they've done one, but it could be 20 years old, right? And so it's one of those things, and we'll talk about this later on too, is that we've done it, we've put it away, we think we've checked the box and marked it off, but what could have happened in the meantime is we've had a divorce, or our beneficiaries have passed away, or maybe our people that were going to be our fiduciaries have passed away. So those things have to be updated, and that can be a scary thought too. If it's out of date, it's just can be just as bad as not having one.
Right.
And so, those are certain things that should trigger some alarm bells for us to pay attention to. I think another interesting statistic here is 33% of older Americans who have not discussed later life and end of life plans with their family, right? So a third get to the point past retirement, they're octogenarians or whatever, and haven't discussed what's going to happen next. And I deal with that a lot on the backside where there's problems. That's the probate side, is we're trying to uncover stuff, trying to investigate and find out where assets are and that sort of thing. And that is setting up for a lot of problems.
Right. I think, is it fair to say that I don't think we want to talk about our own morbidity, right? We don't want to talk about, end of life planning. But your end of life planning should not be at end of life. It should be during your life.
Right. Yeah. I think that is exactly right. That mindset is right. Is that we tend to think we're going to be invincible for a long time, and the problem with that thought is, we just put it off to another day. We'll get a chance. We'll get around to it. Right. And a lot of times we don't get around to it. We just forget about it. But if you ask people, they'll all say, "Yeah, I think I should have one." That'd be a good idea.
Right.
And it is, but I think it comes down. There's a lot of decisions that go into that, or a lot of reasons why people don't have one in place. But you can tell it's important to folks, but we just put it off too long.
Well, I think it's just like investment planning and financial planning. I know I need to do it, but life happens. Mm-hmm. I got to take the kids to the game. We're getting ready to go out of town. Work's so hectic. That's where you just got to slow down a little bit and say, and listen, we're all guilty of it. We got to slow down a little bit and say, listen, it's time to address what we worked so hard for.
Right.
Because you really do. You want it to go to the people you love, you care, the things that you care about in a timely manner. So we don't inconvenience them emotionally, financially any more than we need to.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is I would probably guess that out of my clients, I'd say 3/4 of the time, it doesn't take that long to create the plan and get through all of the steps that we need to get through. So it's not that time consuming, honestly. It's just taking that first step.
Yeah. I think that's it. Next slide. Who and when, Stan?
Yeah, good question. And so you can see on this slide, we've got the full spectrum. And so it is really not just, I think there might be the public perception that estate planning applies to people that are middle-aged or later in life. And it does, but that's not the only group, right? And I got some great examples for that. It really, it applies to anybody that turns 18. That's over 18 all the way to your 95. And there's different phases of your life will determine how much or how extensive your estate plan is, right? So let me give you a great example of somebody that should have some estate plan put in place when they're younger, right? So when you turn 18, by law, you're considered above the age of majority. You're now an adult and can make decisions on your own. The consequence of that is, too, that your parents can no longer make decisions for you, any decisions for you, not only financial, but also health. So, for example, I have a good friend whose son is playing football. He's going off to school in Pennsylvania to play football. And one of the things the coach told his parents was, you need to get your son advanced healthcare directive. Because if he gets hurt here and he goes to the hospital, they won't talk to you. And I have a story based on that too that I heard recently is a kid goes to college, goes to a concert with his buddies. He's surfing the crowd.
The mosh pit.
Right, the mosh pit, right? So he's surfing the crowd. He gets to the end, they just drop him. Lands on his head. Friends are there, they pick him up, but he's woozy. It's a concussion, honestly. And so they take him home that night. He's still not right. They end up taking him to the hospital. Well, they call his parents. His parents have to drive out of state to get to the hospital. When they get to the hospital, the physicians won't communicate what's going on with the son because there's no healthcare directive in place. Healthcare directive is a simple document, but it is part of a estate plan. And it's one of those pieces that makes the foundation. And so when you're 18, that's a document you should have. You should create an estate plan. Even if it just has that document at that point in time, you should have it in place. Now, I would recommend more, but you should have that in place. And so you can see that it applies to people that are 18, but then as you get older and you get married with kids, or you get a divorce and you have maybe a blended family, those situations call for an estate plan too. It'll be more complicated, obviously, but still applies. And so there really isn't a generation that it only applies to. If you are over 18, it's time to consider the basic documents to get in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So any time that we're talking about when you have a life change, right? Marriage, divorce, kids go off to college. Mm-hmm. Maybe you move from one state to another. Yeah. I mean, those would all be just obvious starting points to go and address your estate plan. Yeah. Maybe make adjustments to a will, trust, whatever that might be.
Exactly. And we talk about that later when we go through our steps or whatever. And we explain that, but that's absolutely correct, right? Anytime there's an event in your life, your planning should be a focus.
Right. Let's take a look at the polling questions. Let's look at the numbers, how they came out.
Yeah. You have a will over 10 years, and it looks like, 20% have a will over 10 years old, and 80% do not. So I don't know if that means they don't have a will at all, or if it's relatively new.
Right.
Either way, if it's over 10 years, my recommendation is you ought to take a look at it.
Right.
And just examine your life, and maybe things have changed.
Yeah. Okay. Super. Let's go to the next slide. So why do people lack an estate plan?
I will tell you in my experience, and you can see the statistics here that, half of the people believe that their assets aren't worth it, right? They don't hold enough. And I will tell you just blankly, that's false, right? You shouldn't, not that that's a wrong assumption, because it's normal, I think, for people to think that, but you don't have to have a whole lot to still need a plan, right? There's a lot of consequences for not having a plan, and you're stuck with what state law allows you to do when you don't have a plan. And if you can have you may only have a house, or you may only have some family heirlooms that have been handed down. Those are pieces of property that you need to have a plan around, and would dictate the necessity of even just a simple will, right? That's part of an estate plan. And so, value shouldn't dictate, whether or not you need a plan, right? It's certainly not how we go about in analyzing whether you need a plan. What you have doesn't matter.
I remember sitting down with so many clients jointly, and the first question we'll ask is, you do have a will and a wish. Take the monetary, value of whatever you want to put on it aside, but you still have a will and a wish how you want those assets disseminated. Right. So you certainly would, I would assume, in most situations, if you could have control, you would want to have control.
Right, absolutely. And here's the thing, you make a very good point there. The consequence of not having a will or any kind of plan is you then lose control of the destination of your property.
Right.
And what I mean by that is the state law is going to dictate who gets it. And you may not want those people to get it. Maybe you want some institutions to get it. So without having a plan in place, you're never going to see that result.
Right.
Another reason why people don't have plans is because they find it hard to find trusted advisors, right? Whether it's a financial planner or an attorney or the team itself, they have a difficult finding them. And you made an interesting comment the other day. It's like, not all attorneys practice estate planning, right?
Right.
And it's just like not all financial planners understand the estate plan side of it too, and make sure that it's cohesive. And I think the value, so you should shop around somewhat. You should, if you have an accountant, ask your accountant, right? If you have a financial planner, ask your financial planner. Maybe you do have an attorney, ask them who else does estate planning, right? It's good to have that team in place, and there's a benefit to having them all under the same roof.
Yeah, I think it's that, again, that holistic approach that everyone's on the same page. I know that's how we practice it here. And we have that great communication among all the teams about that client's goals and objectives and challenges. And how are we as a team going to help that client get to where they want and need to be?
Right.
And I think you kind of elaborate on professionals in this industry, and no disparagement among any, but everyone has general areas of expertise and practice. Right. And I encourage to seek out and work with the experts in their areas, but make sure they can communicate with your personal wealth management team. And what does that look like? It could be the accountant, it could be the financial advisor, it could be the attorneys, it could be the insurance agent. Maybe they all come together to insure and to generate a plan that accomplishes your goals and objectives. Right. And they need to be experts in their area and not jack of everything.
Yeah, right. That's very true. Very true. I mean, I have a good example of that. I have a client that I did sort of a complicated estate plan. We set up a family limited partnership, and I had to work with their accountants that they've had for years. Straight-laced guy, kind of this what you might picture as an accountant, right? Very little personality.
Right.
But he knew his stuff. But the problem was he didn't know anything about what I was trying to do for them. So I was trying to educate him about a family limited partnership and tax consequences on it. And he had to look it up before we could generate the plan. And so that's an example of not, having an expert, but not an expert in the area that you need him to be in.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Slide. Oh, we're getting into the poll.
Yeah, another poll came up. Are you currently working or retired? So that's good to know too. It does have an impact on examining your estate plan, maybe not changing it, but it also it is a life event, right?
Right.
It should trigger you to think about it, but it also can have an impact on how you're going to plan with those finances, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not you're going to move them around to do certain things.
Yeah, exactly. So the wealthy are not necessarily better prepared.
They are not, right?
Very surprising statistic.
Yeah, 15% of Americans earning more than $150,000 have an up-to-date will. Now, I will say that if you get to that threshold, you ought to have more than just a will. But, the interesting thing about that is, it's 15% of Americans earning more than 150 have an update to will. That means 85% of Americans making that kind of money have nothing, right? Or don't have a plan in place. And so that is really alarming to me because that's enough money to be concerned about. Great example of somebody that's wealthy, had no plan at all, was Prince, the artist, right? And this, people may know this, but this is a man who died worth tens of millions of dollars. His personal music collection alone is probably worth hundreds of millions, and died without a will. No trust, no nothing. And the consequence of that is it costs a fortune now for his nearest relatives to defend his estate from claims. And you call them predators and creditors, right?
Yeah, predators and creditors.
And that's exactly what has happened, right? His estate has spent millions of dollars on attorney's fees defending paternity lawsuits, right? Everybody coming out of the woodwork saying, I'm a child of Prince. And that's a consequence of not having a plan because it's in the probate court. That's not in a trust to avoid all of that. And it could have saved his family a lot of money and a lot of grief.
Yeah. I mean, we had, a really terrible situation, could have been avoided, but we had an older client sit down with us a couple of years ago, and we were talking about their estate plan, and quite comfortable, wealthy, and I noticed that the wife was crying, and usually that's not the situation we want to have when you're sitting down with your financial team, right? So she's crying, unless it's in a good way. She's sitting down and she's crying, and I had to kind of stop the meeting, kind of collect herself for a second, and I asked her, I was like, why? What's wrong? What's going on? And she says, we worked so hard. We've accumulated all these assets, but we don't have any children to pass them on to. There's no super close family in there, at least from their comment, that they knew they just wanted to. So we had to kind of take a spin. It's not about accumulating more wealth for them. Now we had to take a spin to say, okay, let's protect it. Let's generate whatever you need to live on. But now we need to start thinking about how can we pass on to the ones and the things you care about, and for them, charities were very big. So we started taking that spin over in that area. Now, the unfortunate part of the story is that I think it was not much more than maybe a month or two after that, the husband passed away. The wife, after leaving our office, visited another attorney to kind of get some documents done. She got hit and killed. Now, we encouraged them multiple times, and we can't certainly make anyone do anything, but we encourage them with your estate, large, small, or whatever, you should still have some basic documents in place. Yeah. They didn't have a will, they didn't have a trust, they didn't have anything in place. Right? Here's the family that would pick up.
Yeah.
And the only thing that they really had for some attorneys to even put their finger on was a napkin where the husband had written out some basic things. Now, it certainly didn't settle the estate, or anything, but I'm sure you could only imagine that I call creditors and predators that were giving my office a call, talking to my team members, saying, I'm a long lost cousin, I'm an uncle, I'm an aunt, I'm a brother, I'm a sister, whatever it might be. And we, you just don't want that.
Right.
They wouldn't have wanted that.
Yeah, based on what you're saying, if charities are important to them,
right.
Charities aren't in line to receive those assets,
Right.
That's the shame of it, because the law is not going to care about that.
Right.
That's a great example of accumulating the wealth, but just not taking the time to take care of it.
Right. And we unfortunately, we see it more times than not. Yeah. Not with our clients, because I know we have that opportunity to impress upon them.
Right. Well, it's easier for us because we're in the same building, right? And so we have that routinely. It's like, well, just let me introduce Stan, or let's sit down with Graham for 5 seconds and at a minimum make the introduction so we feel comfortable and come back.
Right.
It's easier in that regard than it is in other situations where you've got to go across the square or around town to get to the next attorney.
Well, I think certainly in Atlanta, Georgia, probably some of the worst traffic
for sure
in the United States. Do you really, well, we're already hectic in life to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And with everything that's going on right now, do you want to really be driving all over town? Right. You want to spend that time trying to interview, and which you certainly should. But, it's nice for a lot of our clients, and I'm confident speaking for them, that they can have one spot. Yeah. I mean, everyone's different in how they create their practice, but it works well.
Oh, yeah. Agreed.
Yep. We have let's look at the answers to the following questions.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Working. That's a pretty good split. So 2/3 are working and about 1/3 are retired. And so, both of those categories I would suggest are, places you should be thinking. What I'd like to know in the working aspect is how close are we to retirement, right? Or did we just start working? Is there a 401k in place, et cetera? That has an impact on how you're going to set up an estate plan too.
Yeah.
And what to examine.
We're in the middle right now of the largest wealth transfer ever in history with the baby boomers.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine we have more wealth. And then I think there's a statistic on some numbers coming behind us, because you got to think, if they're passing the wealth on, let's say the baby boomers on to, let's say, my generation,
Yeah.
And my generation is going to have those assets that have to pass on to another. So you have multiple generations all coming back to I forget exactly, it's the Y or Z.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's more important than ever. So
yeah. I have several clients with inherited IRAs.
Yeah.
Right. And we're always trying to work around what are we doing with those. And particularly now that we have the new Secure Act that came out, right, that dictates how long you can keep those in that first mechanism before you've got to take them out or take distribution. So those are all factors to be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Slide. Strains of probate.
Right. Another poll question just came up. Have you gone through the probate process with a loved one in Georgia or another state? Love to hear your answer on that as well. But the probate court, I'd say there's a strain for a number of reasons, right? There is the financial strain that comes with it. There is an emotional strain that comes with it in terms of dealing with that. And there can also be a strain on relationships. So for example, in the first part, we estimate that the average cost of probate in the state of Georgia is anywhere from 3 to 8%. Now, if you live in other states, it's more than that. But it's 3 to 8% of the value of the assets. And that cost comes from a lot of things. It is attorney's fees, it is fiduciary fees, it's taxes also that can get associated with it. And we're not talking about federal taxes. We're talking about income taxes that can be generated by an estate that have to be paid. And state taxes that will have to be paid. And you got accounting fees that come in there too. So as you can tell, the larger your state gets, the more money can be sucked out just for going through the probate process. Now, the probate process comes into play when you have a will. It's also in play when you don't have a will. So if you want to avoid that process, you got to think outside those boxes.
Add more layers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The other strains that you deal with here too is, I call it an emotional strain because it takes so long to get through probate. A minimum of 6 months by law. And if there's any complication in the estate, if there's a complicated relationship, or if you've got multiple pieces of property that you're trying to deal with, or dozens of beneficiaries or heirs, the process will last longer. Anywhere, I would say it's not uncommon for 2 years to be in that time frame. And it becomes emotional because it's a job to do. It's like having a second job. But most of the time, it's working for someone that you just buried. And so, it's hard to go through that grieving process while you're trying to still take care of their business.
Right.
So the emotional toll is just huge.
And I think we're so busy in our own lives, right? You said that it's a second job.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to mourn at the same time.
Yep.
You're trying to do your day job while you're doing the estate.
Yep.
I can only imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing about probate court too, and I would say this generally about court in general, it's an adversarial process. It invites conflict. And if there has ever been any kind of crack or fissure in a relationship, it's going to come out in the probate setting. Right. People will fight over assets, and it doesn't take a lot. They will, even if it's just personal property, or they will mistrust the executor or the fiduciary who's in charge, thinking that they're hiding things or they're not being fair, and it invites that potential for conflict. And that causes the strain on the family relationship, right? I mean, we see it so often, and it just doesn't take much for that strain to come in. I have clients all the time, and we deal on the probate side too, that we have sisters at each other, right? Because dad died, and he was the glue between the two, and we end up with property disputes, and we end up with disputes over financial accounts or things like that. And it's just, it can be really, really tough to come back from that.
And I know we've seen it working together with clients. It doesn't have to be a lot of money.
No.
It's just a change of a situation that sparks or brings up what was already maybe a thorn in the relationship to begin with.
Yep.
And then now it's a point that they can stand on.
Yep.
And it drags out. It can divide families. Hopefully no one here today has experienced that. But unfortunately, we've seen that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the stat here is 35% of Americans who have gone through, probate have experienced conflict as a result. And I think that's probably a little bit on the low side, to be honest with you. It happens all the time.
Right.
All the time.
Right.
We have an answer to the following question. We do. It looks like, we've got a lot of folks have gone through the probate process. 67% have indicated they've been through the probate process. I'd really love to know behind that number, was it easy for them or was it difficult?
Yeah.
I would say it's not every time that it's difficult. But there are times when you can get through it smoothly, but I will guarantee it hasn't been short.
Right.
They just rarely aren't.
And I know when we teach some classes and courses in the schools and around town, we try to impress upon it's not necessarily a bad mechanism, because it's good to have it there.
Yeah.
I mean, you need it. It helps organize the system. It tries to divide assets fairly, but it's certainly not perfect, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
let's make it as convenient as possible, as less stress, less friction, right? Mm-hmm. So we can all move on with the rest of our lives. It's already stressful enough to lose someone you really cared about.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the pyramid and from the foundation, and let's move on.
Mm-hmm. So we sort of classify this, you can put it in different layers, but you have to have basic pieces in any estate plan. And there are really just a few documents that create that basic foundation. You're going to have a will, and the will is the most talked about piece of any estate plan. I would say it's not an estate plan in of itself. It's just a piece, but it is the basic part. No matter the plan that you make, you're going to have a will in it. Okay. You may have other things on top of it, but in that basic foundation, you're also probably going to have powers of attorneys and healthcare directives. People call them living wills or healthcare proxies or things like that. That's the healthcare directive. It's nominating somebody to say what to do for your person, your treatment preferences when you can't. So you need to have that document in there, and that's going to create your basic foundation, the biggest level. So those are your biggest building blocks. Sometimes they are the plan for really simple things, but most of the time they're just a piece of the plan itself, right? So when you get those in place and you've created that foundation, you can think about other types of things to add on to it that you want to add to it, right? Or that you may need. And so, from the foundation, you get to a basic level of planning. You would layer in things like beneficiary designations, right? Or payable on death types of accounts, assets that will transfer to folks, or mechanisms that get there. You could also add into that a testamentary trust inside a will. That gets a little more complicated and may fall into that next level that we would consider an intermediate level of planning. So if you started with a will and you added other accounts that were going to transfer to folks, in the next level, you would be thinking about how can I manage it not only in my lifetime, but for somebody else's. That's your trust type of plan that you add in, right? Now the trust has, so many different ways to create them. And they can be just basic probate avoidance, where I'm going to create a trust that's not going to end up in court. It's a private contract, essentially, that's between two parties, and will make sure assets never touch the court. And that would be an intermediate level. If you wanted to do more with that trust, and I will tell you, once you started creating the foundation, the basic level, you understand it, now you know what else you can do. And you start thinking more. And I'm sure you do this with financial clients. When they come in, we set up an IRA, right? But maybe we're going to start buying individual stocks or be a little more aggressive. We'll have offshoot accounts. You can think of the same thing when you start doing an intermediate or advanced level planning. When you get to those levels, now we are taking care of other people. Right. Advanced level planning may be a special needs trust for somebody, or a life insurance trust that's going to fund multiple generations to come, right? Like the Rockefellers do, or other types of plan that will avoid taxes, right, for long terms.
I know when we're sitting with clients, like the pyramid, we're kind of talking about your financial house. Mm-hmm. You want to build a strong financial house, but you don't start from from the roof line down, right? You want to build that solid foundation, get the basics in place, and then we can build that house up. And if you notice, the house is very certainly strong on the foundation, but it's also very thick and heavy right in the middle.
Right.
And then as we get up to the top, then we can build in small caps, emerging markets, micro caps, international, and a little more higher risk investments.
Yeah.
And you mitigate risk, you diversify. It's the same difference, I think, when you're coming to financial planning, right?
Right. It's a great way to think of it, because when you start adding in all those types of markets that you might invest in, at the top of our pyramid for our side might be charitable giving. Now we're going to start making gifts annually to do certain things with, or we're going to set up a charitable remainder trust for that institution that we care so much about. That is an advanced level plan at the very top, after we've created all of the other building blocks to get there. Can't start there.
Right.
If you started there and tried to do it, the thing would fall apart, because you haven't created the basic will and the fiduciary accounts and other things that transfer assets before you dealt with your charities.
Right.
And so you got to have that house foundation.
Stan, I often get questions, what's the difference? What's the difference between a revocable and irrevocable trust? You mind adding to that?
Yeah, so one of them is, a revocable trust means you still maintain control of that asset. You can put it in, take it out, you can terminate the trust. You can add multiple beneficiaries, you can take those out, you can change it around, do lots of things. It's super flexible. The irrevocable trust is just as the name implies. You create it, you open it, you cannot close it. Now, you can, it's just now you got to go to court to do so, right? There's a whole stream of law around that tells you when and how you can revoke it, and you got to convince the judge it's okay. But the other aspect of that irrevocable is you have no control. And somebody else is going to be your trustee in charge of your assets, and so you're losing control of that asset. Now, it's a fantastic planning mechanism when you're trying to avoid tax, or you're trying to qualify somebody for benefits, right? Because you still get the benefit of the money, you just don't own it anymore.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. Let's go ahead. Do we need to address a polling question, or do we?
Yeah, we already asked. Yeah,
let's go ahead and move forward. So let's talk about the different steps to success.
Yep. And we'll try to get through these relatively quickly, but you and I do this all the time with our clients, and we have this 6-step process that we go through with every scenario before we, when you get to that last step, then you've really completed your plan. But in the beginning, it is step 1, to create our team. Right. Let's draft our players, if you will, right? In the fantasy draft. And, you start with your financial planner, and then you get your estate attorney involved, right? You pick them. Identify who your accountant is, or your tax advisor is going to be, or your insurance agent, if that's important too, right? In terms of life insurance policies and special other policies that may fund assets in the future. Yeah. And maybe a banker sometimes, right? And so, or identifying who a fiduciary is going to be, trustee, executor. Step 1 is create that plan, right? We think it makes sense when you have them in-house, because it's so easy to talk back and forth.
And communicate with, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But you can do it as long as those professionals, understand the language and understand what's trying to be accomplished. That's the biggest important part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Step 2 would be fact finding. And this is, all of our clients, we start with this worksheet that has to be filled out, and questions have to be answered. And what we do there, and this is probably a big part of it, is we sit down and we dive into what you have, what your goals are, what you're trying to avoid, who's in your life, who do you not want to be in your life, right?
Right.
Which is just as important. And really just dissecting everything, getting as much information as we can. What documents do you have in place now? How long ago were they created? What are the things that have happened in between the creation of those documents, right? Understanding all of that allows us to come up with ideas for the plan, right? And that leads into step 3, which is examining all of that information.
Right.
And we go through it and we see, okay, we got X, Y, Z amount in our 401k, but we also have an inherited IRA. Okay, what do we do with those two? If our goal is to provide education, how are we going to do that with this?
Most efficient way possible.
Right. And avoid tax, right? So we're trying to examine all that and understand where it is, how can we get to it? How can we use it? How do we delay or avoid tax if we're going to use it, et cetera? So we go through and examine all that before we get to step 4, which is making a recommendation, right? And when we make the recommendations, it's usually multiple recommendations. Like, you can do this, but I'd also advise you to take a look at this or consider this option. And, one of them has more control, one of them has less control. What's your temperature on that? And we go through and examine all those. I may come up with an idea and a plan I think is great. The client doesn't like it because they're losing control of the asset. Right. So then we got to adjust, right? And make a change.
I think it's so important that, we go back to really emphasizing the steps. You don't want to miss a step. When you miss a step, are you being efficient? Are you creating the process that needs to be in place to accomplish your goal and objective the way you would want it? And the only thing you're doing is shortchanging the process. You're shortchanging yourself, and you worked too hard.
Yeah.
You scrimped, you saved, you sacrificed. Why would you take any steps? And sometimes it takes longer. It takes longer, but you know what? At the end of the day, you don't miss a step. You get exactly what you want. You get exactly what you need in an environment where everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
That's just so important. We got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yeah.
Let's use them, right?
Good point. Very good point. Yeah. It does take longer, but I think it's so thorough. Right. And you're not really missing anything that might surprise you later.
Yeah.
Right. Which is important. And then step 5 is we create the plan. That's the drafting part, right? Where we sit down and come up with the language that's necessary to create our plan and the documents necessary to execute. And there can be a lot of documents sometimes and sometimes not. It just depends on the plan, but we all take each of these steps seriously, no matter how simple the plan really is.
Right. Absolutely. And I think the caveat to that, it doesn't matter how simple we think it, or most importantly, the client might think it.
Yeah.
Everything's more complicated because you want to make sure you cross all the T's and you dot the I's.
Yeah.
No one has a simple life.
No.
Everything's always much more complicated, but we want to try to at least convey that it's simpler, but it's not. Everything's more complicated.
I will say something on that because I hear that all the time. Well, I just need a simple will.
Yep.
And we start the conversation, and then the client will say, or our prospective client will say, "Oh, well, I forgot to tell you, I got divorced." Yeah. Or I've got this, something else out here. Okay.
Right.
Now we need to consider that. And here's why. It has an impact here, right? There's a pothole waiting for you to step in. And so even though when we hear it's simple, it may be, it may not be.
Right. And I know when we get into the financial planning and aspect of it, we really need to understand how you are. We can create the greatest plan in the world that's going to knock the ball out of the park for you, get that home run you want. It's going to get you exactly where you want to be, all that kind of great stuff. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to execution and the willingness to follow through with the plan and strategy. I think that's really key. Making sure you're mentally and physically at a point that you can follow through with the plan over the long term.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Last step is a review process, which also takes us to the next slide, I think. But you got to review it after you create it.
Yeah. You don't buy and forget. You don't create a portfolio and don't maintain it. You don't have a garden without knowing that sometimes you got to change things up. You got to pull the weeds. You got to make some adjustments, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Next analogy. Yeah. Do you want to touch on this one?
Just window review. Large estates, small estates. I think we kind of touched on that before.
Yeah, a little bit. And so if you have a large estate, we'd say every year. If you've got a smaller estate, and I'd say every 5 years. Now, caveat to that is what's large and what's small. Right. And I think that's a moving target for people. Sure. They're not all the same. I can't say that a large estate is anything over 100,000. That's not necessarily true, right? You can have lots of moving parts even in the 100,000. But think of it like this, and we've talked about this. Anytime you have a life event, that's when you should think about reviewing the whole plan, financial plan and estate plan together. So life events are the birth of a child graduating high school, a child graduating college, right? A divorce, a second marriage, a parent dying and leaving you an asset, right? Or major illness, that affects finances. That may impact, your estate plan. Opening a business, selling a business, right? Things that are big in your lifetime should say, trigger, yeah, let's examine this.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to remind everyone, our calendar, again, is going to be popping up on the screens. Make sure, again, you just put what general time and date works best for you. Doesn't need to be exact. We're going to call and confirm. And if we need to make an adjustment, we'll do it. I think the key is, like we always talk about, it's just taking that first proactive step. You started the day. What's wrong with sitting down with some professionals, getting great information? You're going to walk away knowing more than what you started out when you met with us. And if we end up working together, fantastic. If we don't, great. You got excellent information. So just put down a general date and time that works good for you. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. At this point, let's open it up for questions. I think all along the way, I think we had a lot of our attendees hopefully jotting in some things. So let's go ahead and open up those questions. Don't be shy. There's never a bad question. We do have some kind of queued up right now, but go ahead and type that in, send it in, and we'll try to address as many as we can in the few minutes that we have left. Stan, you want to go ahead and pop in on a couple of those?
Yeah. First one, can you help me with a will or a trust if I live outside the state of Georgia? And this is the famous attorney answer. Depends.
Right. That is a famous attorney answer.
But the answer is, if it's just a will, then probably not. And the reason why is because state law dictates probate process, and a will is guaranteed to be in probate. And so each state is going to have requirements about what a will has to say in order to qualify for that process. And so we can't draft wills in Tennessee or Florida. But if, on the other hand, you're dealing with a trust, and if you have property in multiple states, I always recommend the trust, because you don't want to be in probate in two states.
Right.
We can help with the trust because those are governed by the Uniform Trust Code, and that's adopted by all 50 states. And so we can handle and have drafted trusts for people that live out of state. We've done them for folks that live in Tennessee and Virginia and Florida, and so as well as Texas. So we can do those and have done them often.
Right. No, great question. Next one. You want to go ahead?
Yeah. Looks like somebody's asked us, are online trusts valid? Now, I think what that means is if I got a trust from an online source, right?
Right.
And there's a few that I could name, but I won't because I don't want to give them any credit. But it depends. And I'll say this with those. And a lot of times, and it's not to say you should always contact an attorney, but you get what you pay for with an online trust. And what I mean by that is you may not know what you don't know. And what I mean by that is if you don't understand the mechanisms of trust or what shouldn't be in there or needs to be in for what you're doing, then you're not going to know what questions to ask or what things to write to get it in there. Right. So it's the danger of not having that basis of knowledge that you would get from having a discussion with an attorney. Right. So they could be valid, but they may not accomplish what you want them to accomplish.
Yep. Let me take this one. This is a great question. Is a will enough? I hear this all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say maybe, maybe not. Right. Kind of depends there too. It has, I have plenty of clients where a will is certainly enough. That's all, they have a very simple situation. They don't need a whole lot. Maybe they don't have any kids and they have a spouse. They've got all their other documents in a row. Then a will is enough. It's really a matter of looking at everything and making sure that it is just enough. Right. You don't want to be short-handed on an estate plan.
Right. Well, I think, at least the way I think about it, and I know we encourage our clients, and I know our clients feel this way, is that you've worked so hard to accumulate these assets. They're important to you. Your estate is to pass on the goodwill. I think we just want to get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's important.
right. Is it worth saving a dollar here or there? Maybe, maybe not. But I would probably say at the end of the day, it probably wouldn't be if it did go on your way.
Yeah, and here's the consequence of that too: is if you're trying to do it, cheaply to save the dollar, you may be costing somebody else time in the future to unravel it.
Time. Yeah, we talked about it earlier. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and we'll wrap it up. I think we have one more.
Oh yeah, another question: living trust or will are both required? And the short answer to that is, if you're creating a trust, you need a will to go along with it.
Right.
Because the will is going to act as that foundation to build the trust on top of.
Kind of like within the pyramid.
Yeah,
Right?
that's exactly right. So you can't. I have seen trust without a will, and it creates a problem because you're still going to end up with the probate process. And if you do that, no matter what, you still have to get that trust funded properly. And the problem if you don't have a will is it may not help fund that trust.
Right.
And so you've created this document that you spent a lot of time on and that has no assets to do anything with.
And I've seen this and heard this, and I know we've chatted about it. More times than not, I have seen unfunded, unexecuted trust.
Yep.
Now, unfortunately, I'm not saying that was scrupulous or anyone was trying to do any ill will, but the trusts aren't inexpensive.
Right.
And you create a trust, you pay the attorneys for it, but you don't even take the extra steps to make sure things are titled to it, funded, all that kind of good stuff. So
That's
I've seen that a
correct.
lot too. Yeah.
Yep.
Let's take one last question. I want to respect everyone's time this evening. Had maybe a question about that second session I mentioned, possibly a little apprehensive, maybe a little unclear. So let me just wrap it up and kind of explain what that's all about again. Basically, it's simply your opportunity. Y'all are asking incredibly questions on very complex legal matters. So it's going to generate additional questions, concerns. And again, that is your opportunity. Absolutely nothing is sold and solicited. We don't know each other well enough to do that. But that's your opportunity to sit down with professionals and get some questions, if not your questions, answered. And at the end of that, you can decide. If you're ready to take that proactive step, I'm sure that Stan and myself, our teams are ready to jump in and work with you on accomplishing that estate plan, the financial plan. The key is, like I've always said, you take some information from here and you make a proactive step.
Mm-hmm.
And that's during our meeting or after a meeting. I encourage you to take advantage. So our calendar's popping back up. Take a moment, put down what general time and date works good for you. I know we all have a busy schedule. You don't need us chasing you all around. Put down what general time and date works best. We'll call you. If we need to make us adjustments and changes, it's no problem. We'll give you 1 hour for that meeting at no charge. All right. So I want to wrap up for Stan too, and just thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know it's later in the evening, but again, I know it's an important topic. I know we want all answers on this. So again, thank you so much for being a part of the webinar tonight, estate planning. Thank you.